I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The demand was delivered without ceremony, but its meaning struck like an act of rebellion. Queen Camilla wanted unrestricted access to the late Queen Elizabeth II's private vault, a sealed royal chamber containing personal jewels, handwritten correspondence, confidential family records, and objects never intended for public display. When King Charles learned that she had sought entry without first securing his personal approval, his reaction was not confusion, it was fury. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the authorization paper once, then again, as if the words might change beneath his disbelief. They did not. Camilla had asked palace officials for the keys, the inventory, and the right to enter without him beside her. The private vault was not an ordinary storeroom. It was a sealed family chamber, holding personal letters, ceremonial pieces, keepsakes, and possessions kept separate from the crown jewels, the nationally protected regalia used for coronations and state ceremonies. The king, the reigning sovereign, placed the paper flat on the table at Clarence's house and looked at the aide who had brought it. "Who told her this could be considered?" he asked. His voice stayed low, but the silence that followed revealed the danger. He had spent weeks reviewing his mother's belongings, deciding what belonged to the institution, what must remain sealed, and what might one day pass to William, Catherine, or younger royals. This was not paperwork to him. It was the final duty of a grieving son. Camilla saw the matter differently. She believed her role as queen, the sovereign's wife and ceremonial partner, gave her a place in decisions involving royal property, especially objects that might be worn at state receptions or future ceremonies. Yet her request reached far beyond one jewel. It covered the entire private collection, including boxes marked with restrictions written during Elizabeth's lifetime. That detail transformed Charles's anger into alarm. He closed the folder with force and ordered the keys secured now. Every permission was suspended. No aide, courtier, or member of either household would approach the chamber until he discovered how the request had moved so far without his approval. The palace aide watched his expression harden and understood that a domestic disagreement had become a crisis. Camilla had challenged more than a lock. She had touched the boundary between a husband's loyalty, a queen's authority, a son's grief, and a dead monarch's final wishes. But the demand could not be understood through keys and closed doors alone, because behind it stood two people carrying entirely different ideas of marriage, inheritance, and who had the right to enter Elizabeth's private world. For Charles, the sealed vault represented the final private boundary surrounding his mother. For Camilla, it had become proof that the palace still did not fully trust her. Their conflict was no longer about jewels, keys, or old letters. It was about belonging. One feared that sacred memories were being disturbed. The other feared she would remain an outsider forever. Charles carried the weight of every object inside that chamber. Elizabeth had handled many of those possessions herself, leaving handwritten instructions beside pieces connected to her parents, her marriage, and her 70-year reign. The royal collection, the vast group of artworks, jewels, furniture, and historic objects held by the monarchy, contained both public treasures and deeply personal items. That distinction mattered, because one wrong decision could turn family memory into public scandal. Camilla felt the wound from another direction. She had endured years of public hostility, private judgment, and slow acceptance before standing beside the king as queen consort, meaning the wife of the reigning monarch, rather than the sovereign herself. To her, access was not greed. It was evidence that her authority was real. She sat alone in her private room after learning that the keys had been withheld. Camilla removed her glasses, folded the request letter once, and stared at the page. "A guest in my own household," she said quietly. The queen felt humiliated, and that humiliation quickly hardened into resentment. Charles felt betrayed for a different reason. Camilla had not simply questioned a restriction, she had allowed officials to move toward the vault before speaking directly to him. The king could forgive disagreement, but he could not ignore secrecy where his mother's final wishes were concerned. William urged restraint when his father explained the dispute during a private conversation. The prince, as heir to the throne and next in line to become monarch, understood that mishandling the collection could damage more than one marriage. It could divide the current reign from the future one. He warned Charles that if staff began choosing sides, the conflict would spread through the family. Anne shared the same concern. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the sovereign's eldest daughter, knew that several sealed boxes contained material never intended for ceremonial use. She told her brother that unrestricted access could expose private family matters that could never be taken back once opened. Then, Charles discovered something worse. A documented palace inventory request showed that someone had asked for an updated list of the most restricted shelves 3 days before Camilla's formal demand arrived. The timing changed everything. That earlier request led the king backward, to one ceremony, one whispered disagreement, and one private exchange that had quietly transformed unease into open confrontation. The crisis had not begun with a written request. It had begun 12 days earlier, after a private ceremony meant to honor Elizabeth's years of service. What should have brought the family together instead exposed a wound no one could ignore. A locked case, a disputed brooch, and one sentence spoken in private pushed Camilla toward open defiance and convinced Charles that she was crossing a line. Camilla stood before a selection of objects from the late Queen's personal collection at Windsor Castle. The remembrance ceremony was a private family gathering, created to honor Elizabeth's life through items she had used, worn, or protected during her reign. Among them rested a diamond and sapphire brooch that immediately caught the Queen Consort's attention. She asked whether she could wear it at an upcoming state reception, arguing that the gesture would celebrate the monarch's legacy rather than diminish it. Anne answered before anyone else could soften the moment. The Princess Royal, the traditional title given to the sovereign's eldest daughter, said the brooch had never been classified for official use. She recalled her mother stating during a recorded family discussion that the piece should remain among private possessions. The rejection was firm. Camilla heard something harsher beneath it. Charles tried to calm both women, but his careful silence only made the damage worse. Camilla saw his hesitation as agreement with his sister and as a public refusal to defend her place. Anne saw his restraint as necessary protection for Elizabeth's wishes. The king stood between them, knowing one sentence could deepen the divide. Camilla confronted him later that evening when no aides were present. She told Charles that she could not carry the duties of queenship while every meaningful object remained controlled by people who still judged her past. The king answered that the vault followed his mother's instructions, not old resentment. He rested his hand against the locked case and told her that some inheritances brought obligations, not privileges. The words cut deeper than he intended. Camilla replied that she would seek a formal clarification of her rights. Charles believed she meant a narrow legal review, a simple question about ceremonial access. She meant something much broader. A confidential inventory was ordered the next morning through a household official who assumed the Queen had already received sovereign approval. The request covered far more than one brooch. It reached toward sealed shelves, private correspondence, and a locked drawer containing handwritten instructions, naming which relatives might receive certain pieces after Charles's reign. When the king finally understood what that demand could expose, he stopped calling the crisis a misunderstanding. He summoned Camilla, cleared the room, and prepared for the confrontation neither of them could avoid. There were no courtiers in the room, no secretaries to soften the language, and no careful phrases to hide behind. Charles waited beside a table holding the unsigned access order. Camilla entered expecting resistance, but not the cold force of the anger that met her. Within minutes, the dispute became their most dangerous private confrontation, because neither was prepared to retreat. Charles dismissed the final aid and ordered the door closed. Clarence House, the king's London residence, had witnessed countless private meetings, but this one carried the weight of a marriage under pressure. He slid the request across the table and asked why she had tried to reach his mother's most personal belongings without speaking to him first. His voice remained controlled. His eyes did not. Camilla answered that she had followed proper household channels. She insisted that the queen consort, the wife of the reigning sovereign and his official ceremonial partner, could not be expected to seek family permission every time she performed a royal duty. To her, the request was about authority. To him, it was about trust. Charles leaned forward and told her that rank did not erase boundaries. Elizabeth's private instructions would not be pushed aside for convenience, ceremony, or status. The king reminded her that the vault held more than jewels. It contained personal letters, family promises, and objects tied to the late monarch's final wishes. Opening it carelessly could expose private matters and destroy confidence across generations. Camilla pushed her chair back. The harsh scrape broke the room's silence, as she accused him of allowing guilt toward his mother to control their marriage. She told Charles that Elizabeth still stood between them, shaping decisions even after death. The Queen believed his refusal was not protection, it was punishment. Charles did not raise his voice. He told her that guarding the vault was not guilt, it was a promise. Then he revealed, through a documented private account left among his mother's papers, that Elizabeth had personally asked him to prevent unrestricted entry after her death. The words struck Camilla harder than his anger had. She went still and demanded to know whether her name appeared in the sealed instructions. Charles refused to answer. He said the question itself proved why the chamber could not be opened under pressure, suspicion, or fear. Camilla watched as he removed his signet pen, the personal pen used to approve royal papers, from beside the order. Charles closed the folder without signing it and delivered the final words with painful calm. The request was denied. Yet his refusal was only an emotional decision. Turning it into an unbreakable royal order would require the support of those controlling the household, the records, and the legal boundary around the crown. Royal power rarely moved through shouting. It moved through signatures, custody lists, private secretaries, and people who understood exactly which doors must never be opened. After refusing Camilla, Charles gathered a small circle to determine whether his decision could be challenged. But the meeting soon exposed something worse. Her request had already traveled deeper through the palace than anyone had admitted. Charles entered the restricted meeting carrying Elizabeth's handwritten note. His private secretary, the keeper of the royal collection, and a legal advisor waited in silence. The royal collection meant the historic art, jewels, furniture, and ceremonial objects connected to the monarchy. Some belonged to the crown itself, while others remained private family property. That difference mattered because crown possessions passed automatically from one sovereign to the next, but personal belongings could still be controlled by inheritance instructions, trusts, or private wishes. The king listened without interruption as the legal advisor explained the limits of Camilla's authority. He rubbed his thumb across the edge of his mother's note and looked more wounded than victorious. Charles had protected the vault, but the decision had placed his marriage under strain. If he weakened now, Elizabeth's final instructions could be ignored. If he acted too harshly, the Queen's humiliation could become a wider royal crisis. The keeper confirmed that the sovereign controlled physical access to the chamber. He also warned that Camilla's title could confuse household staff if verbal requests were not matched by written restrictions. The Queen Consort held a senior ceremonial position, and some aides might assume her instructions carried automatic approval. That uncertainty had allowed the request to move forward. William joined the final part of the discussion, because several sealed instructions concerned the future reign and objects intended for the direct line of succession. The family members expected to inherit the throne. The prince supported his father's refusal, yet he urged caution. He told Charles that protecting the collection was necessary, but turning the decision into public punishment could damage the marriage and weaken confidence in the monarchy. Then the room changed. A documented internal record traced the confidential inventory request to one of Camilla's senior household aides. The aide had asked for a list of restricted jewels before written authorization existed. William immediately understood the danger. Charles understood something darker. Someone had treated the Queen's private interest as permission to act. The king issued a new custody protocol, a formal set of rules controlling access. 2 signatures would now be required before the vault could open. The keys would remain under his direct authority, and no inventory could be released without written approval. The decision made his power unmistakable. It also made secrecy impossible. By nightfall, the new rules had reached both households, and Camilla's reaction showed that the denied request had become something far more painful than a lost battle over royal property. The consequences arrived quietly. No announcement was made, no title was removed, and no public reprimand followed. Instead, access codes changed, staff received new instructions, and one scheduled briefing vanished from Camilla's diary. Each alteration carried the same message. Charles had not merely rejected her demand. He had placed a formal wall between the Queen and Elizabeth's most private inheritance. Camilla received the revised custody notice from her private secretary shortly before an evening engagement. A custody notice was a written order explaining who could handle, enter, or review protected royal property. She read every line without speaking, placed the paper beside her untouched tea, and asked whether her own senior aide had been removed from future collection briefings. When the answer came, her expression tightened. Yes. The Queen felt diminished inside the palace, even though the public knew nothing. That humiliation mattered, because authority within the royal household depended on how staff interpreted access, trust, and proximity to the sovereign. It also mattered because Camilla had spent years proving that her place beside Charles was permanent. Now one internal order made her feel as though the old doubts had returned. Charles suffered the consequences as well. He cancelled a private dinner with his wife, not to punish her, but because he feared their anger would deepen before either had regained control. The king stared at the empty place in his diary and understood the cost of his decision. He had protected his mother's wishes, yet the victory felt painfully close to loss. William saw the danger spreading between the 2 households. During a private conversation, he told Catherine that once staff began choosing sides, a marital dispute could become a constitutional image problem, a threat to public confidence in the stability of the crown. The prince feared that whispers inside the palace would soon become headlines outside it. Catherine urged him to keep the family talking, before silence turned into permanent division. Anne felt relief when Charles confirmed that the vault had been secured. Yet she also warned her brother during a documented family call not to mistake control for resolution. The Princess Royal knew Camilla had crossed a line, but she understood that humiliation could harden into resentment. The aide who ordered the inventory was removed temporarily from all collection duties, sending a sharp warning through the Queen's household. Then another detail emerged from the written request. Camilla had not wanted only ceremonial jewels. She had also sought access to a locked correspondence box containing Elizabeth's private thoughts about the monarchy's future. The Queen realized her demand had made Charles more determined than ever to keep those letters sealed. With both sides isolated, the conflict seemed destined to harden, until one unguarded meeting stripped away their titles and forced husband and wife to speak as 2 wounded people. The turning point came without advisors, legal papers, or ceremonial authority. Charles found Camilla alone after midnight, the custody notice still folded near her hand. For the first time since the dispute began, neither spoke as king nor queen. What followed was not a simple apology. It was something harder, an admission that fear had been guiding them both. Charles sat across from her and let the silence settle before speaking. He admitted that his fury had come from the fear of betraying the final trust Elizabeth had placed in him. The vault was more than a locked chamber. It held promises, private instructions, and family memories that could not be restored once exposed. That mattered because one careless decision could damage his mother's legacy and divide the next generation. Camilla did not defend herself immediately. She confessed that her demand had come from a different fear, that no matter how faithfully she served, the palace would always treat her as temporary, conditional, and separate from the monarchy's deepest history. The queen consort, the wife of the reigning sovereign and his official partner, had gained rank, but she still feared she had not gained belonging. Charles told her the restrictions were not a judgment on her worth. Then he accepted his own failure. By keeping Elizabeth's instructions from her, he had allowed the safeguards to feel like a secret sentence passed against her. The king understood that silence had turned protection into humiliation. Camilla lowered her voice and admitted that ordering the inventory before speaking to him had been a serious mistake. She said frustration had pushed her toward a boundary she did not fully understand. The queen also confirmed during their private recorded conversation that her aide had expanded the request beyond what she had openly discussed. Then Charles revealed the detail that changed everything. Elizabeth's written instructions did not permanently exclude Camilla. They allowed supervised access to selected ceremonial pieces, while keeping private correspondence and designated inheritances sealed. A designated inheritance meant an object specifically reserved for a named relative or future generation. Charles proposed a controlled review. He and Camilla would examine approved items together, with Anne present to explain their mother's wishes where necessary. The arrangement would protect the vault without treating the queen as an intruder. Camilla agreed to withdraw her original demand and remove the aide from any further involvement. Charles reached across the table and took back the folded custody notice, not to cancel the safeguards, but to replace humiliation with a shared agreement. Their marriage had survived the hardest night, but the palace could not contain the echoes forever, and by morning, the first public sign of the conflict had appeared outside Buckingham Palace. By sunrise, the private conflict had become a national spectacle. A newspaper front page showed Camilla arriving alone beneath the headline, "Locked Out, King Blocks Queen from Elizabeth's Secret Vault." Broadcasters gathered outside Buckingham Palace, crowds pressed against the barriers, and commentators treated one denied request as proof of a marriage in crisis. The monarchy now faced a challenge no locked door could contain. Camilla saw the headline before leaving for her first engagement. The front page had turned an internal custody decision into a public symbol of rejection. Outside Buckingham Palace, television crews debated whether she had tried to seize Elizabeth's jewels or had simply asked for clarity about her ceremonial role. One broadcaster described the dispute as a struggle between the memory of the late queen and the authority of the present one. The phrase spread across the morning coverage. Charles reacted with immediate frustration when the newspaper was placed beside his breakfast. He folded it once and refused to read the remaining pages. The king knew an angry denial would only expose more details about the vault, including the sealed letters and designated inheritances. That mattered, because the collection was not merely valuable. It contained private family decisions that could affect future relationships and public confidence in the crown. Camilla carried the sharper wound. She watched commentators question her motives and understood the trap closing around her. Silence made her appear grasping. Explanation risked revealing Elizabeth's private instructions. The queen realized that the public was judging a decision without knowing the fear, humiliation, and misunderstanding behind it. William urged restraint during a documented morning call with his father. The prince argued that the public needed reassurance that the marriage remained intact, not a detailed list of what lay behind the vault door. He advised a controlled display of unity and warned Charles that defensive language would make the crisis look deeper. The answer came at a scheduled charitable reception. Charles arrived beside Camilla, paused before entering, and offered his arm. The Queen hesitated for only a moment before taking it. Every camera captured the gesture. It was small, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. The palace then released a formal statement, confirming that access to private royal collections followed established instructions. A royal collection meant historic jewels, artworks, and family objects connected to the monarchy, some held publicly and others protected as private property. The statement added that Charles and Camilla remained united in preserving Elizabeth's legacy. The public mood began to shift. The dispute no longer looked like a permanent separation. It looked like a painful boundary being enforced. But the cameras had recorded only unity. The final decision inside the palace would determine whether the vault had divided the monarchy or taught it how memory and authority must coexist. The final verdict did not come through surrender. Camilla did not receive unrestricted access, and Charles did not abandon the safeguards his mother had entrusted to him. Instead, both accepted a harder truth. Love could not erase duty, and duty could not be used to humiliate love. The vault remained protected. The Queen's demand was withdrawn, and the monarchy emerged with a boundary strong enough to preserve both memory and marriage. Charles issued a final written directive confirming that Elizabeth's private vault would remain under restricted sovereign custody. Sovereign custody meant that access stayed under the direct authority of the reigning monarch, rather than passing automatically through title, household influence, or informal request. The king made the rule absolute, because one careless exception could expose private letters, disrupt inheritance plans, and damage trust across generations. Camilla formally withdrew her demand for unrestricted entry. She accepted supervised access only to objects approved for ceremonial or public royal use. The Queen understood that the restriction was not designed to erase her position. It existed to protect promises made before she entered the chamber and before Charles inherited the responsibility of keeping them. Anne joined the first controlled review, carrying her personal knowledge of Elizabeth's intentions. The Princess Royal helped separate family memory from ceremonial duty, ensuring that each object was handled according to the late monarch's wishes. Her presence mattered because she could recognize the emotional meaning behind pieces that official records described only in cold language. Charles unlocked one outer cabinet while Camilla stood beside him. He selected a diamond and sapphire brooch approved for state use and placed it carefully in her hands. The king explained, through his mother's documented instructions, that Elizabeth had preserved it for moments when continuity mattered more than personal ownership. Camilla accepted the piece without triumph. She understood what it represented. The locked correspondence box remained sealed. Both agreed that some words belonged to history only when the time and intended recipients were right. The aide who ordered the premature inventory was permanently removed from collection duties, proving that no household official could act beyond written authority. William witnessed the arrangement and recognized its meaning for the future reign. The prince understood that monarchy required a clear line between personal inheritance, public service, and the dangerous belief that status granted ownership over everything behind palace walls. Camilla left without the complete access she had demanded, but no longer felt deliberately excluded. Charles kept his promise to Elizabeth without sacrificing his marriage. His fury became discipline. Her humiliation became understanding. The keys returned to the king's custody. The Queen walked beside him with her position intact, and Elizabeth's final boundary endured, leaving the crown stronger, wiser, and united. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.